Dagda agus tá fáilte romh, is mis an céilí beag. Hello, and you're welcome. I'm the little storyteller. Today we're going to present episode 2 in my series, Bardic Lore, and today I'm going to look at the question of, what is a bard anyway? What do they do? Where do they come from? If you're interested in finding out more, stick around. So, episode 2 in our Bardic Lore series. In the first episode, we had a quick look at my views on story and how important that is from a cultural perspective and what kind of function it fulfills for a society, for a community, and the powers involved, and kind of my view on how we are influenced and how our perceptions change based on the stories that we are exposed to. Today, I'd like to have a look at, the tellers of those stories, the people who actually share these stories and these interactions. So I refer to the title of my series as Bardic Lore. I refer to myself as a Dagda Bard, but I'm going to explore that word bard in the Irish tradition and see what more we can learn from that. So, what is a bard anyway? What do they do? And where do they come from? In case you missed it in episode 1, here's a little bit about me. An Scéalaí Beag stands for the little storyteller, Oscuelga in Irish. The person I tell the stories about is Untitled Chapter, an ancient deity of Irish folklore, and a more Oscuelga stands for big. So it's the large Dagda and his little storyteller. I'm also a presenter and events host, and part of my day job as well is a tour guide around the island of Ireland, bringing people to places, sacred places, ancient places, heritage sites, and connecting them to the stories that existed on that land. So we're talking about stories again in this series, and today we're looking at who are the storytellers, who is the person who brings us these stories, and what power of words, the power of words in all of these stories. So a couple of things I'm going to touch on: where do bards come from, what role do they fulfill in society, in ancient Irish society, and what powers do they possess. So we're just going to go through, give a little bit of an insight on these things, and then I'm going to take you through and introduce you to 3 bards from our ancient Irish folklore and their characters, and kind of give you a little bit of an insight into the role and the position that these people played. So first up, where do bards come from? There's many different ways to kind of look at this information. A lot of the stories that we have are all translations. They've been originally kind of recorded in oral tradition, and they were jotted down and kind of transcribed into written form by early Christian monks. So the ancient Irish folklores and mythology, all of our ancient stories come from early Christian manuscripts. All of the things like the Book of Kells, the Yellow Book of Lecan, the Book of Fermoy, all of these really ancient kind of 9th century texts all have these grand kind of pages given over, and this is like handwritten kind of lead ink scribe style. If these grand pages get written over to Irish folklore, the Irish mythology and the Irish kind of stories that existed before Christianity arrived in the island. So tracking back to all of this, searching for the bards, searching for the poets, can be a bit of a chore, but it's a labor of love for me, and it's something I really enjoy doing. So there's a couple of ways some can become a bard. Some are actually just born with the gift, and there's an example of that later on I'll share with you. But it's literally they are born with this almost a level of eidetic knowledge, their ability to kind of harness words and to kind of speak straight away, right out of the womb, or sometimes even within the womb. They're still able to alter reality by the power of their declaration, by the power of their words. So some are actually born with this gift. The majority, though, are trained, and they're trained into Druid school. So to touch on Druids is probably a whole extra topic just to go into Druids in Irish tradition, but Druids in society fulfilled a very specific role around, the learned ones, the educated. They were seers. They were kind of the future. They were prognosticators. They were people who, could alter reality. They could manifest magical powers. They could give prophecy. So Druids is a pretty big umbrella term. But within the Druid school, you will also be trained in the arts of the Bard. The Fila, as it's known in Irish as well, the top level of Bards are known as Filas. And these individuals have been kind of brought through, they've been trained from early childhood, they've been brought to kind of have memories and to remember things very clearly and to kind of be able to recite, to be able to stand up and to perform and to always have the right words and to acknowledge that the power of words is a very important thing. Another place you might find a bard is actually the warrior school. In ancient Irish culture, there were things like the Fianna, the bands of warriors. They were actually trained. Up in Ulster, you had the Machrit, and these were sometimes young noble people, like the families, the youth of families that would gather together. And in early age, you'd be learning how to play hurling, the national sport of Ireland, one of the national sports. But it's kind of a precursor to warrior training. But apart from learning the skills of battle, warriors also had to learn, the true warriors had to learn the feats of poetry. They had to be able to recite the words, they had to be able to remember, they had to be able to acknowledge, and they had to be able to recite and perform feats of, it is actual poetry in order to be able to communicate and establish their reputation. So as much as you would have, battles with swords and shields, you'd also have instances in the Irish folklore of battles of words where, the warriors would come together and would actually be a showdown of, who can actually outbest the other person, not with arms, but with words. So you can find bards in a number of different ways, but all of these kind of characters invariably become a big influence in the stories that they are about them, but also in the stories that they share and that they provide. So next thing we're going to have a quick look at is what role did they fulfill? So the early kind of Irish society was based on an oral tradition. There wasn't really a written language. The first written language that came along was known as Ogham, and it is a series of kind of marks or kind of cuts along a main kind of. Okay, well, I could probably go into a whole topic about Ogham, or there are actually better people out there to do information about Ogham. Laura O'Brien might be a person to look up in regards to Ogham and exploring, that ancient Irish language. But even then, you don't carve an Ogham stave just to send someone a letter and say, "Hey, how's it going?" Or to, recite a story to someone. There were very, very specific messages that would be carved in that way because there's a lot of effort involved. So in an oral tradition, the people who can remember the stories, the people who can remember all of the words become pretty important. They're trained either in the warrior school, either from birth or in the druid school to remember, to always kind of have the information. And in those days, in early days, it's not just a matter of remembering, 9 times tables, from your school learning. It's a matter of remembering important things like lineage. If someone wants to establish, who they are and, what reputation they're going to carry, someone has to remember that. Someone has to remember, oh yeah, you are, John, son of John, and Carmel. Carmel and John are son of and daughter of, and all of that lineage being able to kind of express and be able to kind of define who a person is, either by their bloodline but also by their deeds. As we say, like if a hero slays a dragon in a forest and no one's there to report on it, did it actually happen? So bards invariably are always there. Any story you find about the Cuchullans or the Fionns, as much as they're trained in poetry themselves, there's always going to be someone else there to recite it, to record it, to acknowledge it. If you want to go further back amongst the two of the Danann, the Morrigan, she is a goddess of prophecy and poetry. At the end of the Battle of Moytura, when, well, again, that's a whole other thing I could go into, and I don't want to go too off topic, but it's actually the Morrigan, by the use of poetry, that establishes the end to the conflict. Okay, and that probably takes us into the next point in what they actually do: make a declaration, and not just a matter of just make a random statement. It's an actual formal declaration. The war that I mentioned, the Moytura Moitura Part 2, the second Battle of Moitura, if you want to look it up, or the Cath Magtura. My pronunciation in Irish isn't the greatest there. But the second Battle of Moitura was fought between the two of the Danans and the Fomorians. And it doesn't officially start until a war prophecy is presented, until a poem is actually presented to say, okay, well, we're going to have this conflict. These are the rules of engagement. And it's poetry, it's bards, it's the filler who actually do that. And even though the conflict has happened and like heroes have fallen and like, you know, Lugh has fulfilled his destiny, all of that has gone on, but it's not over until the Morrigan looks across the battlefield and presents a poem. So the bardic act, the act of declaring the battle, declaring what she sees in front of her, and then slipping into prophecy and declaring a future, it's all delivered through poetry. So making a declaration, a formal acknowledgement, defining something. So another important role is carrying news. Bards and Filla had a very unique position almost in Irish society. When you had so many different kind of chiefdoms, kingdoms throughout the island, there was raids, there was wars, there was conflict, always going to happen, you know. But one segment of society, that one group of people who could go anywhere, would always be welcome, would always be accepted, would be the Druids, and more specifically the Bards. So you would not lay hand on any of these individuals, and when we kind of look at their powers in the next step, you'll get an understanding as to why. So you had these individuals, like generally a druid would stay put. They'd be, you know, associated with a particular court, or they'd be kind of, you know, in a druidic school, kind of passing on knowledge and training. Whereas Bards and Philo, you know, roamed around, because how else are you going to get the best stories unless you're where the action is, you know? How else are you going to be able to kind of learn more of these stories and present and kind of take yourself to the next level in regards to your work and your craft and your art, unless you're out experiencing the life and creating from that? And so invariably Bards and Philo would always have, you know, the latest scoop, the latest gossip. They'd know who was involved with who, they'd know what raid was there, and they wouldn't forget. And so they would always carry news. So when a bard would turn up, you know, there was an onus on you. Like, hospitality was very, very important to ancient Irish society. And, you know, there's more to be said on that as we move through the presentation. But you wouldn't deny a bard. You wouldn't harm a bard. You know, when they come, they're going to give you a good time. They're going to give you a story. You're going to learn the latest and greatest, you know, and if they're good at their craft, it's going to be an experience. So what powers do they have? And this always kind of gets very, very interesting to me. I'm very, very passionate about stories because, from I mentioned in episode 1, stories inform our perspective. And through our perspective, we view reality. So if a story can alter our perspective, then it can alter our view of reality. And so the people who have that craft, the people who are able to take us through an emotional experience of a story, or take us through like the envisioning of the great battle or the conflict, who can take us through all of this kind of stuff, have an element of power over our reality because they have a power over our perceptions. And so what we see time and again in the stories is, you know, bards are people who know true names and know the power of a true name. So if you actually have the real name of something, be it a person or a place or a thing, you know, that the naming of that gives you an understanding of it, you know, and gives you a comprehension of that. And by using that true name, you're able to almost imbue a conversation, or to kind of to summon or call the energy or the essence of that individual person, place, thing within the story. You know, if I describe to you, oh yeah, there's an oak tree at the front, then it's just an oak tree at the front. But if I tell you about the sweeping broad branches of, you know, on Crom Dúr, you know, the oak tree Oscuelga, you know, then you're getting a different kind of perspective, you're getting a different feel, and you're almost summoning in that essence. So knowing the true names is a very, you know, important part of being able to kind of take your stories to the next level. But the next point I have there is definition by recitation. So irrespective of you knowing something, it only becomes a thing, it only becomes defined when you place the words upon it, you know? when we're all children, we don't know what a tree is until someone points at a tree and says tree. We don't know what a dog is until someone points at a dog and says dog. In that moment of sharing, by reciting that collection of sounds, you have defined the thing. You've given it a shape. You've given it a position and a place in reality. So definition by recitation. If we take that to a broader scope, to someone who never remembers, to someone who knows the real power of words and knows the true naming of things, you can really get to the point where reality itself is altered purely by the act of recitation, purely by the act of speaking onto it. And I have another example. I know I'm kind of taking us through, but as we kind of explore the next section of this quick chat, we're going to be talking about a couple of bards in specific, and I've got some examples about where that can be seen in the stories. The last thing I will say about bardic power is satire. Now, satire these days has altered. It's still a very specific form of wit. It's a very specific form of targeted humor. It's there to actually scathe and kind of cut the whole act of roasting people and all this kind of stuff, of kind of slagging them off a little bit. That is in essence satire. But bardic satire is a whole different level. When we actually go into the ancient Irish tradition, satire is very serious. It's a very serious matter. And the reason is that by declaring something, by saying that something is a particular way, a particular thing, then you are actually making it that thing. So if you have the power to, as we've touched on, know a true name and to define something by reciting on it, what's to stop you taking that power and saying, oh yes, John, he's an absolute braggart? In a way, some people might believe you, some people might not. But some people who don't know John would hopefully know that, some people who do know Joe would hopefully know that he's not. But other people who don't have an individual, a charismatic individual, telling them a story, taking them through, oh yes, no, I was down here and there was this particular time and, he didn't show great hospitality, or he kind of passed someone by in the street and didn't say goodbye or didn't say hello. He didn't thank someone, all of these things are problematic. And the influence of those stories, how those stories involve our perception, how they inform our perception and define our understanding of person, place, or thing, satire becomes something very, very serious. So in a society where your position is defined by your lineage or defined by your deeds, and those lineage and deeds are recorded, are remembered by a particular segment of individuals, if that individual or those kind of people who have that power, have that ability, they have an ability to then change your status in society by changing the story around you as a character. So I will go into a specific example, and I hope I'm not kind of making this too confusing, but if you think about it from a particular point of view, you don't know me. If someone were to say, oh yeah, that John guy, let me tell you a story about him, your perception of me has changed. Your understanding of me has changed. True or not true, for good or for bad, it's an alteration. It's an alteration to the story. And so satire, used in a very particular, very specific way, would alter someone's standing in ancient Irish tradition. In that it was so serious that a person who was a chieftain or a king could no longer be king or chieftain if a legal satire was placed against them. Now, I use the word legal there, and this comes back to the Druids. Under the Druid umbrella, there's also another caste known as the Bretons. And the Bretons were trained in all of the legal circumstances. So instead of having the gift of creation and poetry and stuff, they'd have the same level of training around remembering and acknowledging and recitation, But their area of expertise was, no, the law says this. The law says that a free man is entitled to no more than 6 pints under hospitality in anyone's free abode. It's a nice reference I found somewhere. So that is understood as law, and when in ancient Irish tradition, probably could be a whole other kind of thing. I might touch on it in another kind of episode talking about Brehons specifically. They were able to define what the right judgment was. And one of the things that they would look for is, what is this person's reputation? What is the history? What is the story of this individual? And if within that story, if within somewhere along the line, there's a legal and well understood, accepted satire placed against John, for example, then my worth has been actually diminished. And so this is a really, really good thing from one perspective, being able to have a formal structure to hold people in a higher kind of status accountable, because who else is going to keep a king or a chieftain in line? If they are the ruling class in their area, in their kind of territory, what's going to stop them from overstepping, going too far? And so having that cultural mechanism of the satire in there used against people of a higher status can be a very good thing in order to kind of make sure that people are like being fair, playing by the rules. But unfortunately, not everyone uses their power for good. And the art, this structure of satire and kind of altering someone's reputation and name through the use of these words, could also be used for negative purposes. So we're going to explore a little bit more about that as we move into the next section, which will be to introduce you to a number of bards, and not all of them, not all the filla, but a number of individuals. Oh, I keep saying bard and filla. Those words are somewhat interchangeable in that they both come from the Druid school of teaching, but the difference in a bard and a filla is that a filla is the best. The filla is the top of the top. You'd find a bard pretty much almost anywhere. You'll find a filla in the court of a chieftain, the court of a king. That's where you find your fillas. So both of the words kind of do mean the same thing, but it's an acknowledgement that even within that structure, there's a grade, and you don't get to be a filla unless you're absolutely up to your chops. And there's testing for that. So I won't go too much into that. There could be a lot more we could say on that. But let's get on to the introduction, shall we? I've got 3 bards to take you through. Arguments could be made that one of them might be a filla, more specifically, and maybe by the end of this you'll have an insight as to which. But I'll take you through one at a time. The first we have here is Crichton Vale. So Crichton Vale occurs in the Tuatha De Danann. So this is the age of myth as far as the cycles go. So way back when the Tuatha De Danann came to Ireland, they took ownership of the land in conflict at the First Battle of Moytura from the Fir Bolg. Their king at that time, Nuada, lost his arm. And because of his physical alteration, because he was no longer physically complete, he was no longer fit to be king. And so the Tuatha De Danann gathered, and a new king was chosen, and that king was Brett. So Brett became the king, and Brett was half Fomorian. So the Fomorian were another people who were in and around the area of Ireland. It's not specified exactly where they came from, but there was a bit of a tight relationship between the two, between anyone who lived in Ireland and the Fomorians. Some would say that they were raiders, some would say that they were, monsters from under the sea, but we do know that there was regular tribute that had to be given to the Fomorians. So Brett, being half Fomorian, the Tuatha De Danann felt maybe we can kind of balance this out here and then things would be grand. It wasn't so good. So Brett unfortunately fell into an oppressive state of rule. And within that, Crichton Vale comes up. So the story where we find Crichton Vale is a Fomorian bard. So he's actually come into Ireland and he is looking for a place to stay. And so he comes to Dagda, the Dagda, who is Ireland's kind of chief deity for hospitality, for hearth and home, for kind of good works, and bound to those rules of hospitality. If someone comes to your home, you look after them, you sort them out for food, you give them a good place to stay, and you take care of them because you make people welcome, and that tradition is still ongoing in a lot of Ireland today. But Crichton Vale, coming from his culture, maybe overstepped the bounds on that. So Crichton Vale abused hospitality, and the way that he did this was to threaten a satire against the Dagda. So the Dagda at this time in the story is building Rathbresh. So he's digging the mounds of Tara, the hill in the centre of Ireland, to fortify the kingdom, to fortify the place for Bresh. And so every day after long labours, he's going home, and as a big guy, he needs a big meal. But Crichton Vale is there, and every day Crichton Vale is like, Dagda, lay upon me the 3 best portions of your meal, or I'll place a satire against you. And this shows that importance of satire, because Dagda can't tell him no because of hospitality, but also can't tell him no because if a satire is placed against him, he's no longer fit to be a member of society in a way. He's no longer entitled to his position as, someone amongst the high echelons of the Tuatha Dé Danann. Don't worry though, because the story does have a good ending, or in Crichton Vale's circumstance, a bad ending. With the help of his son, Angus Og, Dagda gives Crichton Vale a gift. So Angus says, take 3 gold coins, and put them in your dinner. And then when Crichton Vale demands your food, serve him the 3 portions with the coins in it, So that's the best portions because they have gold coins in it. Unfortunately, Crichton Vale has a certain kind of appetite, and without kind of going through taking time with the food, he gobbled it all down and choked and died. So at this point, things seem to be okay for the Dagda, but it does come to Bresh's attention, and the king pulls Dagda up and says that you murdered him and it's all terrible, and how could you do a thing like that? And Dagda's like, it wasn't me who murdered him, it was his greed. And the proof is in in this case, not the pudding, the corpse. And so they open Crichton Vale up and they find the gold coins that choked him. And that is the end of poor Crichton Vale. But the reason why I wanted to bring that story in to give you an insight is the fear around the satire, the worry, the problem there. Now, a legal satire is something that is justly earned and justly deserved. Had Crichton Vale tried to place a satire on the Dagda, whilst being in receipt of good hospitality to the Dagda's personal detriment, that would have been an illegal satire. But again, that would be a matter for the Bretons to try and judge out, and people believe stories. It didn't go so well for Bresh in this. Later on himself, he offers hospitality to a travelling bard, but the bard doesn't receive good hospitality. Instead of being welcomed in, instead of being kind of given grounds to kind of catch the news, share a story, have a nice meal, the bard is put in really poor lodgings. The bard is given barely a decent meal, and from there, Bresh's rule begins to topple because the bard leaves and tells everyone the story of how inhospitable Bresh is. And so that's a legal satire because the bard is justly and rightfully been poorly treated by a king. And a king really should be the best of the best and to set the best example for everyone else. So more story carries on from there. If you'd like to know more about what happens to Bresh and the Tuatha Dé Danann after that, send me a comment and I can let you know that story in time. But again, we have two aspects of satire there. We have an illegal satire threatening someone, and then we have a legal satire toppling someone who justly deserves to be toppled. So next person we're going to have a quick look at is Murgon. Murgon, also known as Murgon Gringo, which is white knees. This poet or bard comes from a slightly different time. So the Tuatha De Danann, take over and they rule in Ireland for a long period of time, but their rule invariably comes to an end as well. And it's the Sons of Mill who actually return, the Milesians also that they're known. And so the Sons of Mill come into Ireland, but amongst their leaders, like when it lists out their leaders, they had like their various warrior chieftains and stuff, but Amergin, the bard, the poet, is listed in the exact same space as all of them as a leader amongst his people. So from the point of view of regard or status in society, he's as equal to a chieftain or a king. What's next about Amergin is that he's the first of the Sons of Mill, the Milesians, to set foot on Ireland when they came in conquest. The setting first, the crossing over, being the person to touch ground first is an important thing. If you're coming with a large group, a large tribe, it's not a case of everyone get off the boats and just arrive. There's that moment of transition, that moment of stepping over a boundary, crossing from one reality to another reality, or a moment to a new moment, and defining that. If you remember definition by recitation. So Amergin steps off onto Ireland. He's the first to do so. And the first act he does is to declare a poem. So he looks about him all across Ireland and he's like, I see green fields, I see bountiful trees, I see broad lakes, I see fishful lakes. And what we have in that story is Amergin defining reality, stepping over a boundary, crossing first where it's safe for a bard to cross because no one messes with a bard, and then defining everything he sees. But then he connects himself to it as like, I am this, I have brought forth here, I am the poet, I am, and he declares himself to the land. So he defines the land through the recitation, and then he declares himself to the land in recitation. So the rest of the Sons of Mill arrive, and they begin their war of conquest against the Tuatha De Danann. But any time, every turn, when there's a problem, when there's a challenge, invariably the story loops back to the person who knows best, because they're the person who remembers, and that's Amergin. So whenever there's a conflict or a confusion, or what way do we do things, all these chieftains defer to Amergin's wisdom. And amongst some of their first negotiations, because it wasn't all blood and battle, there were talks with the Tuatha De Danann. When the leaders of the Tuatha De Danann came together with the leaders of the Sons of Mill, there was an attempt at a negotiation of a ceasefire. And they're like, okay, well, listen, let's kind of stop this here. But how do we get to that point? And Amergin is deferred to. So this bard, this poet, this fella is brought in, and much like the kind of the Breton, the kind of trained druidic practice, knowing the laws, knowing the right words, knowing the right kind of structures, he's able to make a decision on this. And it's said that that's the first kind of judgment that was given in Ireland, because from the Sons of Mill, because he actually says, okay, well, no, we need to back off and give them time here and set it out. But I won't get too far down into that story. So Amergin, this poet, this bard, not only is he kind of like for like with chieftains, he's also their counselor. He's the someone who they turn to for filling in the information, for giving them good reason and good judgment. So what happens next is something I find very, very interesting. The bards and the filla have this ability to kind of step where others can't. Because of the respect, because of the protections that they have, they're able to kind of cross boundaries where other people can't, or where other people shouldn't. And what happens in the stories is that Amergin, with the travels of the Sons of Mill, connects and is the person sent forward to negotiate with, they're listed as 3 different women, 3 different chieftains, kind of wives, or the wives of the 3 kings of Ireland at the time. But when we look into a little bit more into culture and a little bit more around what's involved in the rituals of kingship, invariably a king needs to be married to the land. He needs to be, there's a union of the king to a goddess of sovereignty. And so what we experience in the stories is that this island, which currently isn't named Ireland in the stories, Amergin is the one who negotiates and has a conversation with three goddesses of sovereignty, which is Banva, Fotla, and Eru. And within those kind of conversations, he talks to them, tells them like, listen, this is the how our people are coming to Ireland, and it's our time to take with Ireland. And he promises each of them that he will name the island after them. And so Ireland being called Ireland now, or Éireann, actually comes from Eru, and it's Amergin who kind of arranged and negotiated that dialogue, that arrangement. So negotiating with sovereignty, this area where a bard being able to kind of almost cross over between spiritual circumstances, like the real world and the Irish other world, being able to kind of to step across the bounds and to kind of do stuff that's a little bit outside of the reality, because their reality is defined by their words, by their power, and by their recitation. So Amergin, in this instance, is actually the person who we have in the stories who gave Ireland its name through his work and through his declarations, through his poetic and bardic practice. The last bard I'm going to introduce you to is Aithrin. So Aithrin is one of those characters who is imbued with the power before they're even born. So even within the womb, Aithrin had bardic ability, in that there's a story that when his mother was carrying him, she went to a gathering, and in the alehouse, Aithrin inside her womb smelled the ale, and the mother got a real graw on her, a real kind of need. It's like, I need to have a few drinks here, but the alesman, the server, refuses to serve her, and in the moment that happens, Aithrin within her womb, not even born yet, recites a bardic poem which causes all of the ale barrels in the place to explode and flood the place all over the ground with ale. And his mother kind of gets a couple of handfuls in and is able to drink them down, and that kind of settles the babe inside her, Aithrin, before he's even born. So by the act of recitation, reality is altered. Aithrin's powers, though, do grow as he grows. So after he's born and after he's more matured, there's a tale where he's fishing by the River Morrigan in Ireland, and it runs down through County Tyrone and Donegal. And the river is not giving up fish. So he's not getting fish from the river. And Aithrin has an appetite on him. And he satirizes the river. In this instance, it's not a person, it's not a chieftain or a king. Aithrin uses his power of words to call out the river for not giving him fish. And interestingly, the river responds to it, gets angry for having been satirized, and it floods. So the river kind of breaks its banks, starts to flood all across the land, washing away farms and absolutely causing ruin. And everyone kind of comes rushing to find out what's happened. And Aithrin is like, sorry, it was me. And they're like, well, you need to sort this out. And so Aithrin has to recite another poem, another kind of like recitation, does another kind of performance to the river, calming it, appeasing it. And it's a recitation of peaceful intent is placed upon the river. And that causes the flood to subside and to return to its banks. And all because he couldn't get enough fish from the river. So this is where an example of bardic power defies the natural order, but defines it as well. By placing his words upon it, he changes the course of the river. He changes the nature of the thing by defining it in a different way. Unfortunately, Aithrin kind of becoming more and more aware of his power and the ability that he has. There's that old saying, power corrupts. And it's pretty much true with Aithrin. he begins to live upon the fears of his power. And by that I mean a bard can go anywhere. A bard cannot be stopped going someplace. A bard should always be welcome someplace. And so everyone began to know that Aethrin had this power to define reality and to alter it. And wherever he went, people would present him with gifts. Some gift, anything just to kind of keep him on the good side, keep him sweet, as they say, so that he wouldn't use his powers on them, that he wouldn't place satires on them. And of course, Aethrin went to all of the best places and demanded all of the best things. There's a story of Uchud Mac Luchta, and Aethrin comes to his court, and Uchud is known as kind of an older and wiser kind of king who only has one eye. And when presented in the court, Uchud is like, I respect you and you're welcome in my court. What gift can I place upon you? Aethrin, being himself, requests the king's eye. I would like your eye placed in my palm. And Uchud does. He takes out his own eye and places it in Aethrin's hand. And Aethrin kind of takes it and kind of leaves. And the story is that Aethrin was paying Uchud back for a raid that he had perpetrated like years and years ago. It's not all bad for Uchud, though. The story isn't all bad for him because he has a servant direct him to a place to wash his face. And the servant refers to like the hole in his eye, like the dirk to his eye socket, and that it's all jarrag, which is red with blood. And so Uchud goes, and he kind of captures water from a river and washes the blood from his eyes, from his eye sockets. And Dirk Jarrag became Loch Jarrag, which is one of the lakes in Ireland on the River Shannon. So it's this kind of red lake which comes from the story. Again, even there, the story defines reality. The name of that lake, Loch Jarrag, which is a lake still to this day, is defined by the story of a red bloody eye socket from a king who gave a gift because he was supposed to a bard. Now, I don't know whether it's the monks putting a spin on it, but it does say that God is pleased with Uchud's kind of rightful gift to a poet and restores both of his eyes. I don't know which god, but it doesn't specify, so who knows. But Aethrin's not a really good character, having kind of gotten the eye, he realizes how far he can push his ability and how far he can push the fear of his ability, and it actually leads directly to conflict. He begins to take advantage, and he begins to demand more and more ridiculous things, and nights with other people's wives, and kind of broader kind of gifts and large amounts of cattle, but he becomes very miserly over everything. And at one point he's chased out of Leinster by the warriors of Leinster for just pushing it that little too far. Like, they greeted him, they welcomed him, they kind of addressed him, they gifted him and stuff, and they feasted him. And then months later, when he left, they escorted him bodily. All the king and all his many merry men, or not so merry warriors, brought Aethrin to the edge of their territory. And the least thing you could do would be show a bit of gratitude and say thanks, but Aethrin didn't. And that was the last straw. But Aethrin kind of doesn't even stop there. When King Coher of Connacht of Ulster loses his wife, and he's pursuing a new wife, Aethrin finds out who he has his eye on, and he goes to try and kind of demand that she become his lover instead. And she says no. And then this was an interesting one, he places the mark of shame on her with his satire. So again, he's using his words to define reality. And she gets these 3 kind of blisters upon her face, which then sicken her, and she dies because of Aethrin's abuse of his power. Of course, this is definitely the last straw for Coher, who would defend an Ulsterman against the Leinsterman, but he's overstepped. And Cuchulainn says, listen, we just have to end him. I'm sorry, we just have to end him. And they do, they do catch him, but another character, a druid, in fact, Cofford is the druid up in Ulster at the time, And Kafud kind of warns the warriors of Ulster. He's like, listen, if you go against him, he will summon demons and monsters. He will cast curses upon you with his words. But Cullen's like, we can't let this stand. And they pursue Aithrin down, and they trap him in his own castle, and they burn him. So maybe it's a good ending to a story, maybe it's a bad ending to a story, but it was very interesting how we have three very different characters. And I mentioned earlier on that, you know, one of them could probably be considered not just a bard, but a filler, you know, top of the top, cream of the crop. And hopefully at this point it's very obvious that that will be Amergin. You know, his position in higher society, his counseling for kings, his dealing and negotiating with sovereignty, with kind of deity within a land, and being able to define the land the land by a name as well, really shows that he's absolutely way, way up there. So I do hope that this has been a good insight for you. I do hope it's been a very interesting experience. It has been for me, kind of researching and kind of bringing this forward. I'd like to thank you very much for stopping by and to join us for this Bardic Lore series. I do want to try and do more of these, but I don't know if it's something you're interested in. So if you can let me know by likes, subscribes, by comments, I'd greatly, really appreciate it. If you'd like to know more, if you'd like to kind of me to deep dive into any particular topic touched on here, I do offer courses on the Irish Pagan School, so I'd be happy to kind of dive in further with that, and throw it in the comments, and I will be checking in to see if there's something there. But as ever, you know, thank you very much for stopping by. You can find me on dagdabard.com, at Patreon/Dagda, Shkeli Biog on Facebook, follow me on Instagram for pictures of food and my dog, or Ireland, more so Ireland, you know, the green lands. Thank you very much. Agus slán go fóill.